Wow. Okay, it's been a while since I've been on online. Lots happened since last live stream. I've since had to move again, and unfortunately I've had a bereavement. But let's discuss sport, shall we? Now, obviously, I'm a big fan of the NRL, and I've basically watched every single game since the restart. And what is interesting is how teams are adapting to the new rules. Certain teams are doing better than others, and some teams are struggling where you wouldn't have thought they would be, and some teams are doing a lot better than they would be. But I want to focus to start this live stream on the Brisbane Broncos, and then we can discuss lots of other bits and pieces as questions come in. Now, Brisbane, the Broncos is an interesting example of a team going through crisis. Plain and simple. 14 players have been rumoured to have breached the lockdown bubble, which was put in place by the NRL and the various state and territory governments in Australia to enable the league to restart. Pangai Jr. himself, as an individual, is facing deregistration and an indefinite suspension by the NRL. It looks very likely within the next few days what Brisbane are going to decide to do with his contract and whether he's allowed to play again this season, and a whole host of other things. There's a situation at this team. There's a sense of entitlement with the players. They've won one game since returning after lockdown. They've only won 3 games all season. That was 2 before lockdown, the first 2 rounds, and they've won 1 game since the return to play. They've had record-breaking defeats. It's a shambles. Anthony Seibold, the coach, is taking legal action against some social media companies, and has taken a leave of absence. So he's had to go into isolation in Sydney because the team is based in Brisbane, because of the internal rules within Australia, with different states having different rules on the pandemic and isolation. He's got to isolate for 2 weeks. Then, rumours are coming out about players breaching the lockdown protocols that were put in place by the NRL in order for the sport to resume in Australia. And the AFL has come up with the same principle as well. And what is coming out about Brisbane is not a good look, really. It's quite shambolic that the biggest team in rugby league, the biggest team in the NRL, the most valuable team, one of the most successful teams for consistent seasons, qualifying for finals football. They've only missed out on finals football in 3 seasons since 1988. Has fallen in such a mess. And questions are being asked about the recruitment of players, the recruitment of backroom staff, coaching staff, the front office, the back office, a whole host of questions have been asked about how this team is run off the field, on the field, etc. Now, Anthony Seibold, the head coach, is in Sydney at the moment. He'll be returned to the team in a week or so to resume coaching duties. Now, there's question marks over his long-term future, whether he stays, the club goes, whether he makes it to the end of the season and the end of season review. There's question marks about the outgoing CEO and who's going to replace that CEO. There's question marks about how the board is constructed. And there's question marks about the players' attitude and a whole host of other things. Now, I'm a Cabba Raiders fan, and of course, yesterday, the Raiders were behind at half-time, and this is crucial. The Brisbane Broncos were winning at half-time. And this happens a lot, where they play really well in the first half of games, and then it falls apart in the second half. And you look at their points differential, it's horrific. But you look at their points differential in the first half of games and the second half of games. And the second half of games, they can't score points. So they can't play a full 80 minutes. The last 20 minutes of the game normally is where they fall apart. Yes, I've moved again. I moved yesterday. So this is my wall. That's my wall. I've moved yesterday. I'm sat in my bed at the moment. It's been a crazy last month or so. Family bereavement, and then having to find a place to live in the space of 2 weeks. So July and August has been really hectic. So I've moved for the 3rd time in a year. On the Guardiola side of things with Man City now, I'm not a BT Sport customer. I don't think it's right that the Champions League and Europa League should be solely on BT Sport, apart from the final of both competitions, which is also allowed on YouTube as well. On the Man City Champions League saga, where they've had their ban overturned by UEFA on appeal, but they're still fined, so they're still guilty of something. So I find that interesting. That makes a mockery of the financial fair play rules that we have. Should he be sacked? Well, he's won a lot of trophies, and yes, you could say the amount of money that Man City have invested into getting not only the trophies under Guardiola, but Pellegrini and Mancini and co. It took them a long time to win their first piece of silverware, and since they won that first piece of silverware, yes, they have been consistently winning almost every season. They haven't had a trophyless season since 2011. But I will say this: their issues with European football, it doesn't matter if they're in the Champions League or Europa League, are well documented. They've not had any European success under the current ownership. They've not got past the semi-final, yet they've spent tens of millions, if not billions, of pounds in the transfer market, much like PSG. They can win the domestic cup competitions, gets to Europe, and it all falls very flat very quickly. And some of the reason to do with that, I think, is the mercenary aspect of their squad. Very few players have come through youth academies at the club, the youth academy at the club, and there's not enough homegrown talent in the team. Now, yes, they've got Sterling, but he was developed by another club. Foden isn't getting as much game time as I think he should. And their defence looks lost, not only without Vincent Kompany, but also Di Michaelis as well. Ironically, yes, he wasn't as good as Vincent Kompany, but he was far more capable than any of the defenders they currently have, because he had great spatial awareness and could make up for his lack of pace and sometimes poor positioning with sometimes better, footballing intelligence. They had a very good working relationship as a centre-back partnership. The players they have at the back, I'm not sold on the goalkeeper. I'm not sold on this sweeper keeper mantra. Yes, Manuel Neuer does it. Certain players have certain characteristics that are not universal but unique. And what Guardiola and several other coaches are trying to do is force players to do a role that is unnatural to them. They're trying to overcoach players. So that's why Joe Hart lost favour and confidence at Man City and then bounced around clubs and lost his place in the England side, because he was being forced to do something that was unnatural to him and being overcoached. Let the player play with his natural ability, and then with that, then you can build and tweak little things. You don't have to do it every play. What is wrong occasionally with just putting it into row Z? It doesn't have to be beautiful tiki-taka. Sometimes just putting your laces through it and clearing the danger is far better than playing a pressurised pass with a high percentage chance of it not being successful and inaccurate. On the defeat to Lyon. Lyon are not the side they were a decade ago, or plus 15 years ago, when they were dominating the French league. And French teams haven't had a lot of success in Europe since Marseille in the early 90s. French football in Europe is... Monaco are the only team from the French league system, and they're from Monaco, which is a separate country, to get to a Champions League final since Marseille. So the French league system doesn't produce European Cup winners either. I wouldn't call it a farmers' league. I just think the way that Monaco and PSG have been allowed to basically buy the last decade worth of football, because Monaco won a few titles in there as well since Montpellier, and Marseille were the last, and Lyon last had a few titles between them. The fact that PSG and Monaco basically are the two rich clubs and therefore can just buy the best players. There are issues with the way the French FA has allowed these takeovers to take place, much like the same with Man City and Chelsea over here in England. I haven't even gone to the Newcastle takeover collapse, but I've already covered that in so many videos, and I can discuss that later on. I wouldn't call League One a farmers' league. There's some very good football players playing there, and there's some very historical clubs playing in the French league system. The problem is it's heavily weighted towards PSG, and to a certain extent, if PSG have a floundering season, Monaco, because of the finance. I will talk about Tuka Rosk in due course. I haven't really been following these playoffs since the playing round ended, because I'm a Jets fan and the Jets are out. Yes, I'm happy that the Coyotes are still in there and have made the playoffs for the first time in 8 years. But I think with it now being middle of August, I'm used to this being hockey off season. I'm watching the NRL more than anything else, but I might take further interest as the rounds progress and we see how the players adapt. The Tuukka Rask situation is very similar to a lot of sports. He's asked for leave to return to Finland for family reasons. And there's been a lot of misreporting about the Tuukka Rask situation, which I think is unfair and is completely unnecessary and doesn't do anything to help the situation. It is my favourite sport, but I think for me it just feels weird that it's taking place now. I've seen highlights of a few games that have been played, but I'm not really invested in it this year. I might still grow the playoff beard, but I'm not as invested in the sport this year because I think maybe I don't know how. I don't think they handled the initial shutdown very well, and they could have easily gone to the Canadian bubble cities far earlier than they did, and they could have got restarted, I believe, far earlier than they have. I think there's been a lot of debates about the playoff format with the play-in round. I think that might be very likely to stay long term. I think that could be an adjustment made to the playoff system. And there are those fans that are not happy because it basically rewards teams that haven't really proven themselves in the regular season to get in. Well, my second favourite team are still in the playoffs, so it's not because the Jets have left. I think I was like, yay, hockey's back, great. We should be having the off season right now. So the next couple of seasons are going to be weird. We don't even know when fans in North America are going to return. I've seen a few snippets of highlights packages of games. The atmosphere is strange. I like what they've done with the big screens and the banners, and I like the way they've done the bubble. I think doing Toronto and Edmonton as the bubble locations, I think, yes, in the end was possibly the best outcome. It surprises me that the NHL and Gary Bettman took as long as they did to get all the owners around the table and come up with this solution, because the initial plan was to restart and complete the season, but there were some teams like Detroit that had no hope of making the playoffs, and New Jersey, and they were just going through the motions unnecessarily, putting their players and non-playing staff at risk. And as we've seen with Major League Baseball and the chaos with them not going down the bubble route like the NBA and the NHL and Major League Soccer, and having a whole host of players test positive. The same with Major League Soccer. They had two teams pull out within days of the tournament starting because, again, Florida's infection rate went through the roof and these players just weren't isolating properly. On the Pochettino, will he replace Guardiola at City or Barca? Barcelona's in a mess. Very similar to what's happening at the Brisbane Broncos, a team that's been very successful for a long period of time. Doesn't win silverware for the first time in however long. Doesn't progress to a final for the first time in however long. Again, recruitment, development of youth prospects, some of their transfer policy, and you have to look at a whole host of things when it comes to these very long-term, consistently successful teams. And when they start running out of success, they need to refresh themselves. Because they haven't had to constantly refresh themselves for so long, they've been complacent, I think is the best way to describe how some of these teams have run their recruitment, run their player development. They've overpaid players. Some players have stayed in the club too long. Managerial changes, backroom staff changes. The coronavirus exposed some of these sports, basically, and sports teams for they've been papering over the cracks for sometimes a very long time, like 10, 20 years. And the coronavirus has exposed some sports franchise and sports clubs and individual athletes who've been papering over the cracks for so long. The Brisbane Broncos, the Barcelona situations ring very, very true. On what happens with Pochettino's future, he's been linked with several jobs, and other managers have been appointed in those positions that he has been linked with. But I will say this. What happened at Tottenham, yes, they finished above their biggest rivals, Arsenal. Still haven't won any silverware. They still underperform massively as a team. And the worst Arsenal team in 30 years still wins the FA Cup. So you look at the amount of money they spent on that stadium. You look at the amount of investment they put into the stadium, which overran, was over budget, and they're going to be paying off for a very long time. Because we're not even sure if the NFL is going to be able to play games in London for a significant period of time, and that they were banking on the NFL games to pay back some of the money that was required to be invested into the stadium and the infrastructure, and of course it went over budget. 18 months without signing any new players. Still no silverware. Still no silverware. They've been close to winning the title a couple of times and choked it. Leicester, when Leicester won the title in 2016, Tottenham were neck and neck with them, and then they went from battling for first place to falling back to third. So that Champions League final, they were completely outclassed. The FA Cup semi-final a couple of years ago against Man United, one of the worst Man United teams ever to take the field, outclassed. They get close, then in big games or in a stretch of big games, they fall away. And whether Mourinho is the right guy to be at Tottenham or not is neither here nor there. Will Leipzig beat PSG? The way Leipzig play, they can easily do it. They play as a team unit. They don't rely on one single star player like Neymar and Mbappe. They can easily beat PSG. PSG is a team that plays in the league, much like Scotland, where only one or two teams at the start of the season basically have a hope of winning the league as it currently stands with how clubs are financed and playing squad depth, playing talent. So when they actually come up against tough opponents, they do struggle. Atalanta are a good side. Atalanta play in a far more competitive league. Atalanta are one of the top scoring team in Europe for goals scored. They've got a record-breaking goal scorer up front. They've scored triple figures in goals. And they struggled through that game because they were given a test. And had that been the traditional two legs, Atalanta are still in the Champions League, and we don't know what could happen in the second leg because it was reduced to one leg because of the pandemic and the change of the rules. PSG got lucky. Yes, Leipzig can beat them. Absolutely. Leipzig can win that game. Whether they do or not, we'll have to wait and see. But it's two French sides in the semi-finals. Who would have had money on that at the beginning of the season? Everyone was talking about, it's Man City's year. They got, destroyed. Barcelona, they could be dark horses. They got just fell apart completely. And questions have to be asked about, again, player management, player recruitment, the off-field side, the business side, because the COVID pandemic has really exposed Barcelona really, really badly financially. The club's facing going bankrupt. Now, that would have been unheard of 12 months ago. 12 months ago, if you were to say to me, Barcelona would win no trophies this season, get to no finals this season, so no losers' medals, and would be facing bankruptcy and suffer one of their record defeats of all time. I think it's an equally record defeat. I would have said you're mad, and I would have asked you to be sectioned under the Mental Health Act. What's transpired is the coronavirus has come along. It's exposed flaws in the systems at the club. But it's not just Barcelona, it's a whole host of sports teams and leagues have been exposed for some severe financial mismanagement. And Barcelona are in a terrible mess. What do they do to fix that? Well, they can't spend their way out of trouble. They've got to sell their way out of trouble. And then they're going to have to go back to the Youth Development Board. They're going to have to bring in more homegrown talent than they currently have in the team. Because yes, they develop players and they sell them on. And they don't necessarily give players a chance. I don't know what's going to happen with Lionel Messi. The debate between Ronaldo and Messi is the best player. I think the Ballon d'Or is now awarded to the top goal scorer, rather than it should be the Golden Boot award, rather than the best overall player. For me, the 90s and the 2000s, there were better players playing who scored less goals, but were more rounded individuals who could do a bit of everything. Like your Luis Figos, like your Gutis and your Rauls and David Beckhams, who weren't necessarily goal scorers. They're all midfielders, by the way, not strikers. It's only been in recent years Ballon d'Or has gone to these two guys consistently, and I think that's a problem. I don't think Messi would ever end up in the Premier League. Firstly, he's now over the age of 30. Which is a big risk for any Premier League club because the amount of money they're going to have to spend. And I don't think clubs can justify that kind of transfer fee. This is why I think Neymar's transfer record sticks around for a very, very long time. A good 4 or 5 years at least before any club breaks that transfer record, because I don't think the fans could tolerate or accept that a club could spend that much money during a time when we could see not just we've seen 750,000 people lose their jobs since beginning of March in this country, in the UK. America, we're talking 10, 20 million people who've lost their jobs in the last 3, 4 months. You look across Europe, where obviously football is the dominant sport, the top sport. The amount of clubs that have had to furlough staff, cut back on expenditure. If any club was to start spending big money like that, I don't think the fan base and wider society would be as accepting. So I don't think, it's not just Messi, it's any player will go for the big money for a long time. I think player wages are gonna contract in real terms. Real and actual terms are different things because of inflation. I think yeah, player wages. I don't think they can justify the big money contracts. I don't think the clubs can justify the big money spend. TV deals are going to be worth less without fans. We may see a second or third wave of cases of this virus. We're not even sure when fans are going to be allowed back to stadiums. Now, there's a trial period with the snooker final here in the UK, and the plan is to have fans back in stadiums by October the 1st, which is a positive. Positive. Oh, Claudio, ciao, ciao, my man. How you doing, my Portuguese brethren? Yeah. So on the Messi to the Premier League, yeah, I think his reluctance to speak the native language would be one, but then Aguero hasn't really bothered to learn English, and he's been here for about the better part of a decade. He still, at least in interviews, at least speaks Spanish, and he also speaks Italian because 60% of Argentinians speak Italian pretty fluently, and the rest of Argentina speaks Italian with some competence because of the ethnic and national backgrounds of Argentinian immigrants. 60% of Argentinians are actually Italian nationals. But yeah, a language barrier could be a problem. But I think it's his age, and I think it's the fact that the money that would have to be spent to get him here, he would have to run down his contract to Barcelona and leave on a free for a club to justify signing him. But then you've got to work out how much money he's going to demand in wages, and by the time his contract runs out of Barcelona, he is going to be well past his best. And we know the Premier League is a more physical league. Goal scoring is less for the top goal scorer, so you're not going to score as many goals. Quite physical defending, quite a more physical style of play, and a faster style of play. And if you're in your mid-30s, your legs are going to feel it. What's the most disappointing sports teams in the last 5 years? The Maple Leafs are Barcelona. Well, the Maple Leafs have been the most disappointing sports team for the last 50 years. Let's get that right. I don't think Barcelona have been disappointing in the last 5 years because they've still won trophies. But I would say they've not been at their peak. They've had a golden era. I would say Man United have been quite disappointing in recent seasons. Liverpool have started to pick it up. Man City and Liverpool are streets ahead of Man United. On the aspect of disappointment, there's been a lot of teams that have flattered to deceive and have failed to live up to what was expected of them with all the hype. I mean, I look at the NRL, I look at the NHL, I look at some teams who do fall flat. And yes, the Maple Leafs, with the amount of money they put into their star players, with the expectation every year, the issue with them is their defence and their toughness. In a sport where you have to be gnarly, grizzled, and have a bit of pushback, they don't have enough of those players to get physical with the opposition. They try and outskill the opposition. And some of their defensive plays before the lockdown were really poor, to the point where you're thinking, why is there no pressure on the player in possession? Why is there no pressure on other players trying to gain possession in their own defensive ends? So yeah, you could say the Maple Leafs have been very, very, very disappointing, and they can't seem to get past the first round of the playoffs every season. They couldn't even get out the playing round this year, so they really have underperformed. I'm going to say for the last 3 years, but they keep making the playoffs though, and that's a different thing. That's not them missing out on postseason. That's just them not having that toughness, I think, and they are failing to meet the mark. But then you could say that the Senators are a mess. and they could take a long time to get back to where they should be. The Calgary Flames underperformed for a Canadian market. The Jets, I think, underperformed last year, but the year before they overachieved expectations. So I think they've come back to earth a little bit. They need to do a little bit of readjustment. Boston, they've made 2 Stanley Cup finals since their championship in 2011. They apart from 2013 and last year, so they've underperformed the Blues. I mean, yeah, they won it last year, but for most of last season they were underperforming. The NHL is an interesting one because it has a hard cap and that has more parity. You got your swap sports. You could look at the NFL. There's a whole host of teams underperforming in the NFL. You look at NASCAR. Kyle Busch in the Cup series. In the other 2 series, he's winning races because he's allowed so many races per season in the trucks and the Xfinity. In the Cup series, him and Truex Jr. they can't win a race. But when they race in the lower classes in the NASCAR package, they are quite competitive. They're underperforming, so you have to look at Toyota and their team and why that is the case. That they're not winning races and they're not doing as well. Ferrari and F1 underperforming massively, and you could also say McLaren is another team in motorsport that has really not reached the level that is expected of a really good. And Williams, 2 teams, McLaren and Williams, are teams that are really underperforming right now for their history, what they bring to the sport, not doing good enough. When Ronaldo first came to Man United in the first season or 2, yeah, he didn't speak very good English, but he learned the language. Aguero, he's still, after a decade, pretty much refusing to speak English. That in itself, he's won a lot of trophies. But I would say, I would say with in regards to especially football, or if you're from Australia or North America soccer, I can't see how any of these big transfers can be justified in the massive wages. We've seen during the early lockdown phase, especially March, April, and into May, before the restart, a big heated debate between players' union, clubs, and the players themselves about wage deferrals and wage cuts. And then we saw players voluntary taking the wage cuts and deferrals, be it individually or as playing squads, and having independent discussions with their employers rather than the clubs, the unions, and the players all getting around the table. The players' union, the PFA, advised their members against any such cut or deferral to their salaries. Then you look at what's happened in the lower leagues, and they're saying we need a salary cap. We need spending a different form of financial fair play. It's not working. The TV deal needs to be looked at. And until those issues are resolved, football's in crisis. When the Huddersfield chairman is coming out and saying 50 to 60 clubs, which is 2/3 of the Football League Premier League pyramid, could face going out of business by the start or in the middle of next season, that tells you there is a crisis within the biggest sport in Europe. The way football dealt with the pandemic to begin with, and then the initial weeks of the lockdown was across Europe was a shambles. And some leagues didn't restart at all. Other leagues decided to end early. It's been a mess. There are legal challenges to relegations. I mean, the Wigan Athletic situation is still ongoing. They've lost their initial appeal, but they're probably going to continue to fight their points deduction. But now they're looking into the takeover process and going from there. It's a shambles, absolute shambles. On the side of rugby union has only just restarted the Gallagher Premiership this weekend. It has taken rugby union this long to restart. Football was restarted quite some time ago. Cricket's already restarted, and we had a test series with the West Indies and England. We've got some one-day series coming up, middle of the test series with Pakistan. It's very surprising to me that rugby union has taken this long to negotiate player cuts, wage deferrals, all these various things, and it's taken this long to get rugby on. I think Australia and New Zealand, yes, the population's of those countries is a lot smaller than the UK and the rest of Europe. But Australia and New Zealand dealt with the lockdowns that they introduced better. They got their sports back quicker. They've got much stricter, how do you put it, bubbles, and the various leagues and state and regional governments were in close dialogue from day one. They were in discussions from day one about how to proceed with phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. They've already allowed fans back in. They have very strict agreements to do with lockdown bubbles, what the playing staff, the non-playing staff, and the players are allowed to do. The Queensland border is shut between Queensland and New South Wales, and then the New South Wales border is shut between the state of Victoria. So there are certain procedures in place, and all the teams, Peter V'landys, the current ARL chairman, who's also basically running the NRL at the same time, have all agreed with the state, regional, federal governments a plan to move forward. Same with the AFL, and they've agreed to, have exemption clauses so they can continue and complete the seasons. And this is where I'm going to hark back to the Broncos a bit. The Maple Leafs are the biggest brand in the NHL. Yes, they are. They are the biggest brand, but then they're not actually now the wealthiest team. The Rangers and the Blackhawks have actually got worth more these days, although the Maple Leafs until recently were one of the most, if not the most expensive, most valuable sports team in the world until literally the last couple of years. But since expansion has been brought to the NHL, they have, not won a Stanley Cup. So, but the Maple Leaf situation with them underperforming and not winning, partly down to recruitment. They've obviously changed coach this in mid-season. Babcock got fired. Sheldon Keefe came in. They've got, I think, issues with the GM's office. I think Carl Dubas is out of his depth. I think he's made some real mistakes when it comes to signing players to long-term deals, big money, some of the contracts, some of the trades. I think Shanahan, the way they dealt with Lou Moreno and Shanahan and then Carl Dubas I think there are some issues there. They're doing too much running the team by number crunching, by analytics, rather than actually scouting players and see how they adapt to when a team goes behind. So they're going by, here's their numbers. This is how many passes he will complete in a game. This is how many percentages of hits he'll complete in a game. Shots on target in a game. You want to see a player's attitude when they go behind or when they go ahead. A lot of ice hockey and football and rugby league and rugby is down to player attitude. You can look at the analytics and say, oh yeah, he makes 30 tackles a game. He makes X amount of passes a game. He scores or creates scoring opportunities, X amount of games, success. But that is completely different to, analytical. This is his numbers. This is how many meters he runs. This is how long he's on the ice. And I think that's part of the reason where they're going wrong is how their performances are judged and how Carl Dubas is running the team. Bruins and the Rangers. The Bruins don't make as much money as people think. And their ownership had been criticised during the lockdown as well about how they dealt with their non-playing staff and the arena staff and looking after their employees during the pandemic. The Rangers, they play in the oldest arena in the NHL. I think at some point, Madison Square Garden is not going to be suitable as a venue. It's pushing 60 years old as a current venue with a few modifications. And we'll see what happens. On the point of bringing back the Mighty Ducks, Anaheim are releasing some of their third jerseys and then future concepts, and the original Mighty Ducks style logo is coming back more and more. Their third jerseys from the last couple of seasons has it. But the Mighty Ducks brand name is owned by Disney, and the Mighty Ducks are no longer owned by Disney. It's now the Anaheim Ducks. Should they buy the rights to that image? Possibly. It has been used as a shoulder patch, as a secondary, as a tertiary logo. But the Mighty Ducks, the rights are held by Disney to that brand. Hence the name change 14 or so years ago. But on the same token, they're a team in transition anyway at the moment. and we will see what happens with that transition going forward. Much like the Washington Redskins and now the Washington football team, there are some teams going through changes. The Edmonton Eskimos had to change their name due to a minority of public pressure. This is what I don't like is cancel culture. Now, the Redskins debate has been going on for 50 years. The Edmonton Eskimos, the debate hasn't been there, but they realised, looking at what was happening south of the border, a rebranding was necessary. Rebranding a team, I think the only team that's considering changing their logo and having a rebrand is the Ottawa Senators in the NHL. And it looks very likely they're going to go back to their original logo and original kind of jersey designs in a sense. What's going on with the Senators is unfortunate. It is a team that off the ice and away from play is having issues with off ice management, with Melnick being a very, very bad owner. There's been a lot of issues with player unrest and player misbehaviour over recent seasons. The Ubergate, all the players apart from one involved in that leaked video of them basically slagging off the coaching staff, the ownership, and the team have gone. They're a team that is actually played better this season than people expected. They weren't the worst team in the league, but there were times where they were clearly an AHL team playing against NHL players. Their lack of NHL experience with some of their rookies and some really journeyman players who are depth players. And most of their best players are gone, so I don't know how they're going to build a roster around Brady Tkachuk, but they're going to have to think of something going forward. I don't know what their rosters looks like by the start of next season and how competitive they're going to be. But it is interesting. I mean, a lot of these questions are really interesting, looking at teams that underperform. And question about Barcelona underperforming, I think they've been declining. I wouldn't say they're underperforming. I think there's too much expectation in Catalonia with that team. I think it's the same but there's not enough patience. Barcelona have shown you can win trophies there and still get sacked. There is too much managerial change with Barcelona. I think it's exactly the same with some of the expectation at some clubs across Europe. You need to give a manager a significant period of time to implement his or her ideas on a team. You can't just expect change within a few months. It does take a process. But it's a difficult one. It is a difficult one. My lockdown beard, I've only shaved once since moving back from my previous flat to where I was living to here. I've shaved once my beard off. I shaved in April. So I've been growing this bit of fluff for a good few months now. But I've just zoned out as the days have passed by. I haven't really worried so much about what's growing on the face. I've trimmed it a little bit. I've trimmed bits, but I'm not worried. I've also got the lockdown mullet as well. So my hair's got a bit long as well. So yeah, my hair's kind of a bit crazy as well. But yeah, I've not, because all the hairdressers and barbershops have been shut in the UK, it's been kind of difficult, obviously, keeping up to speed. And we have seen some pretty crazy haircuts in professional sport. Obviously, one of the big talking points coming out of this week in the UK is when a crowd's going to be allowed back. And it's an interesting one. They were initially trialling crowds at the Crucible for the Snooker World Championships, and that was seen as a positive earlier in the summer. And very early on, within the first couple of days of the World Championship Snooker, there was a local lockdowns in Yorkshire and Greater Manchester and Lancashire, and of course Sheffield being up north. They said, right, no, the R rate is too high, but they're allowing another trial to take place today. They're going to trial it out in a few other sporting areas where there can be social distancing, and the plan is to have a percentage of capacity fans in attendance, that is, at sports venues, and sporting events from the 1st of October. So that's only a month and a half. That's only 6 weeks. It's only 6 weeks away, so we'll see what happens on that front. But some sports and teams will significantly struggle without fans being in attendance going forward in the coming months. I mean, we've seen with English football and Scottish football, they've raised concerns that without fans turning up to games, teams will make losses. And as I said, Huddersfield, their owner has come out and said 50 to 60 Football League and Premier League clubs out of the remaining 91. Obviously, Bury went bust this time last year, will cease to exist. And the coronavirus has exposed bad practices within sport, a lot of financial mismanagement and wastage. Some teams were getting away with being badly run off the field for a long time because they were. You suddenly stop the industry, you stop sport, and it exposes bad practices and bad financial management. And this is why Barcelona are, for example, in the state they're in. This is why even Manchester United, one of the wealthiest clubs and biggest brands in the world, are still losing. Up till the end of the season, they were losing £5 million per day because fans are not in attendance. Just let that sink in. Now, they're still obviously in European competition, so they're still getting some TV money. Even so, without fans being allowed at games, they are losing £5 million per day, 7 days a week. So you work that out. It's £35 million a week. Manchester United are losing in revenue. They're still going to make a profit, but their revenues will be lower than with fans in attendance. And this is a Man United team that aren't playing well right now, in the sense that they're not the team they were a decade ago. So let that sink in. One of the most financially viable sports entities in the world is losing £35 million a week. You then translate that to a smaller club in the Premier League or the Championship with less of an international reach, and say you're going to lose, let's say a stadium half the size. Old Trafford's quite a big stadium. Let's say a stadium of 45,000 seater capacity, similar ticket price. Let's say that team's losing £2.5 million per day, and that works out at 12.5 million, about 14.5 million per week. That's going to put a team out of business pretty quickly. So that has to be obviously considered. And the longer the lack of fans in stadiums goes on, the more likely it is that more clubs end up in a Wigan Athletic, Bury, Macclesfield, Bolton kind of situation where they are basically facing going out of business. And that is a massive concern going forward. Massive concern going forward. That has to be taken very, very seriously. Very seriously. It's not just football, it's across the board. We've seen emergency grants being given to the Rugby League. The RFL have received an emergency loan. British Ice Hockey, each team has received a grant, depending on the level that you play in, from Sport England and Sport Scotland and all that, and UK Athletics and things, to cover costs until games can be restarted. And that varies in the amount of money that's been given to teams. Rugby Union has reported massive losses, and they've had to rearrange the international and club competitions going forward. TV deals, not just in this country but across Europe, have been hit quite hard. So, on a UK perspective, it's bad. Across the board, it's quite serious. It's not a healthy look right now. And as I say, I think Australia and New Zealand have dealt a lot better, and much. I don't know how how the best way to describe it, but the Australian government and the major sports in Australia, mostly the AFL and NRL, they worked out a plan of action. They got emergency funding. They solved a TV deal crisis because the TV companies were very likely to withdraw some of the TV money, which would have then weakened the negotiating table when it came to the next TV collective bargaining agreement later down the line. And players straight up within the first 48 hours were willing to take pay cuts and pay deferrals and work through the crisis. European sport has been haphazard, and North America has been an absolute shambles. Now, the sports that have restarted with the bubble plan. Major League Baseball decided to go, no, we're going to stay in our home markets and look at the chaos that Major League Baseball has gone through. There are question marks about the fact that a salary cap is going to be needed. Because fans aren't in attendance, smaller market teams are getting hit massively. And the mess that has been Major League Baseball, it's not going away. Now, players are testing positive all over it's been a tough restart for Major League Baseball. There was concerns that the season wouldn't even restart took. And Major League Baseball, it does have a bad image. It has an image problem. It has problems which are ongoing, long-term issues as well. And the salary cap, or the lack of one, is an ongoing concern, which will continue to be an ongoing concern post this crisis. The long-term health of Major League Baseball is at stake. Same with the NFL. There are issues with the NFL as well. They're also not going down the bubble plan. They're going down playing home stadium, home state. And the US, as we have seen, has got all over the place. Some states have very low infection rates. Other states, it's through the roof. College football doesn't look like there's going to be any college football for this coming season, which would only affects the education programs and sports programs massively. So we'll see what happens going forward with the sport. There's a lot of unknowns in the coming months and weeks as well. We'll have to see how this trial period with fans and limited attendance at certain trial venues goes. And hopefully by the 1st of October, we have fans in stadiums and arenas again. Because sport without fans is not really sport. It's physical activity being played by enthusiasts. It's a hobby being played by enthusiasts rather than sport being enjoyed by the wider community. And that in itself is a massive issue. I'm just going to quickly check the sports headlines because that's always a good thing to do. Let's see what's happening in at least national sport. Ronnie O'Sullivan is 7 frames ahead. Lewis Hamilton's won the Spanish Grand Prix. Who would have guessed that? They're talking about issues with Man City. Rangers stopped playing the second test between England and Pakistan. Rangers are playing Livingston at 4:30 in the SPL. There's not really a lot going on. Northampton are playing Wasps in the Rugby Union. There was quite a bad crash at the Austrian MotoGP. Evan Puel has broken his pelvis after crashing in a cycle race and built up the Tour de France. There's a lot going on. They're saying Man City could actually possibly sign Lionel Messi. I think there are rumours that he could be leaving. Could be leaving Barcelona, but I do find that highly unlikely. I don't see how the justification for such a transfer could, at this current time, socially and economically, be justified. I don't think. As I say, I don't think that the Neymar transfer record was broken for a very long time. But we'll have to see what happens with football transfers. Obviously, the transfer window officially hasn't opened. but deals have been done where players are allowed to move. So Willian going to Arsenal on a free transfer from Chelsea. But it, the, the player market when it comes to sports is going to be interesting going forward. We could ask the question about player transfers and how much is a justifiable fee. Player wages. That's the biggest talking point, because you could basically wait for a player to come off contract and sign him, as Willian has done, going to Arsenal for free. But then you look how much money he's playing for. You look how much he's earning a week. Yes, they've not had to spend any massive overlay and pay transfer fees over a period of time, because that's an issue with the transfer market. Is the transfer fee isn't necessarily paid in one lump sum. It could be paid off in instalments over a decade with add-on clauses. Where if he moves to another club in that period, there's add-on clauses, and that's another issue with the transfer market. Is clubs are facing a cash liquidity crisis with no fans in attendance and weaker TV deals, and having to rebate the TV companies a proportion of the money. Yet they've still got to make these transfer payments. They're contractually obliged to pay money on a basis over a period of time to the previous club the player played for. I mean, the player could even retire before that transfers. I mean, Neymar could have a career-ending injury next season, hypothetically, and the transfer is still being paid off, even though he's not actually playing for that club anymore. He could move on from PSG to another club. Yet PSG and Barcelona still have contractual obligations to sort out finance and sell-on fees and add-on fees. It's ridiculous. So they need to streamline and make the transfer market finance side of things more transparent. There's question marks over player agents and making them more transparent. And we have seen issues, including in the NRL, with player agents not being transparent, and calls to create more transparency in that part of sport, of sports star agents being made to be more transparent in their financial dealings, made to be more clear and transparent on how much commission they earn and how things work, because there's been a huge debate about player agents, not just in European football, but across the board in a variety of sports, and that needs to be addressed. And the coronavirus and the lockdown did expose some pretty shady goings on with player agents that have been going on for years, but because of the lockdown of the global economy and lack of money coming into clubs, yet they're still paying agents fees on these transfers. These player agents are still earning their commission for signing these players to a contract and with a transfer and compensation. They're still earning their percentage in commission. So that is a big thing to come out of the last 4 or 5 months. There was already a pressure being put upon player agents to be more transparent, and player agencies, those who represent multiple athletes and multiple sports, to be more transparent in their dealings. And many agents are very, very transparent in their dealings and very upfront. But there are some, a significant minority, who are very shady. And there is a concern that they have too much influence on sport and how deals are done. We've seen it in the NRL, we've seen it in the English Premier League, we've seen it in European football, we've seen it in North American sports. Player agents have far too much influence on how a sport is run. They really have an influence on far too much stuff. They're not transparent in their earnings, how much they get out of a deal. And some of the contract disputes we've seen with players and teams and athletes and sponsors have been played out very, very publicly in a very public arena. And you could say the Mitch Marner and John Tavares and William Nealand are all at the Maple Leafs. Some of the contracts they're on, big money. And you could argue that their agents, their representatives, have inflated their contracts and inflated the trade negotiations or contract negotiations, and have told their clients to hold out for more money because they get a higher percentage in commission, or because they're holding out for more money because the contract's bigger, they get more money in their commission as well. So they need to. That's something that's been exposed, is the economics of sport and how there is a lack of transparency and there is a lack of clarity Same as sports governance. The sports that are well run have been shown to be well run during this pandemic. The sports that are not as well run or have issues have been exposed. And TV rights, board, non-playing staff contracts, how non-playing staff on the lower end of the scale are treated, issues with cash flow, liquidity. Sports that are well run don't have negative press. They don't have scandal. A sport that is badly run has a lot of front page news rather than just back page news. If a sport is only on the back pages, it's generally better run. If a sport makes the front pages as well as the back pages, then there are concerns about the integrity of the sport. That's my view. If you're getting your sport on the front pages of a newspaper rather than just the back pages of a newspaper, or on a news website, if you're the main story on a news website that covers both sport and everything else, and you're one of the main stories, something has gone terribly wrong, unless it's a first-time championship for a team. If in the regular season, or in the regular season, or even in post-season, before the final of a major event, if you are making front-page news, and you're a sport, or a sports star, or an athlete, or whatever it is, or a sports administrator, and you're on the front page, or the main headline on the news channel or the website, something's gone wrong. At the Olympics, we're not even sure if the Olympics is going to take place next year. We're not even sure if Russian and US athletes are going to attend the Olympics next year. Russia, there's pressure to ban them from Olympic competition. There's still calls towards the IOC to say the Russians shouldn't get out. And on top of that, America, with their infection rate, and because America is the biggest draw for the Olympic TV audience, they may not be able to send athletes because of got to isolate. Athletes still aren't able to qualify for next year's Olympics. So there's a concern that next year's Olympics in Tokyo may still not take place. It's the same with the Euros as well. Because it's a pan-European tournament, that's going to be a shambles to organise. There was already concerns having a pan-European tournament in 2020 because it was celebrating, obviously, 1960 was the first Euros football tournament, that there was already concerns about the logistics. Now what we've seen with the Russia World Cup showed that the travel distance did have an effect on players. What we have seen with the last year's European finals was a concern. We'll have to see on the what happens next year if the tournament actually takes place at all. On the Newcastle United takeover or failure of it, the fact it took so long to make a decision raises concerns about the transparency of the process and raises concerns about the whole deal from day one to its collapse. We know there are other bids on the table. We know that Peter Kenyon is still sniffing around. We know Amanda Staveley spent basically 3 years getting this deal to this point. We know that Mike Ashley wants to sell. We know that he has no choice but to sell because of his other businesses. He needs to keep his retail arm of his business empire going because that's his daily bread, because fans will be in attendance at Newcastle for at least October the 1st. Fans want a change. I think there is some hypocrisy with how this takeover was dealt with. We know there's already Saudi money in English football. Sheffield United is the example I will use. We know there's overseas money from some very interesting countries that don't necessarily have the best human rights record in the world. So it seems to be one rule for one club, one rule for another. There was clearly some political involvement in this. There was clearly pressure put on the Premier League from political sides of things. The fact it took so long to get to the point it did raises concerns about the takeover process of clubs. I don't know what the future holds for Newcastle United. Mike Ashley's, the club hasn't been taken off the for sale board. It's still up for sale. And we do know that other parties are interested in sticking their toe in the water and beginning the takeover process. We know Peter Kenyon has been floating around the same amount of time Amanda Staveley has, so we know that there's an ongoing talks with other potential investors and buyers. But the fact we got so close, and I feel sorry for the Newcastle fans, and I've been following this for the best part of 3 years. 3 years I've been following this takeover, protracted sales saga that still is ongoing. Now, whether they come back with a renewed offer, with a restructured offer over who, because it basically fell apart, not because of the TV rights issue in Saudi Arabia and Qatar, not because of the human rights record of Saudi Arabia. It fell apart because there were concerns over the day-to-day running of the club, who would be the chairman, who would be on the board, and how the club would be run off the field. Questions that should have been asked when Mike Ashley took over the club personally, but the fact it took that long for the Premier League to come to a decision, and the FA. Firstly, they were using the coronavirus as a pretext to delay a decision, to keep pushing the issue down the road, and then football resumed. And then you've got to feel, Newcastle United fans are divided over Bruce as a manager, and we can debate his merits and his flaws as a manager, and some of the statements he's given in the past. But I'll tell you this, even if Rafa Benitez was still in charge, and that was one of the reasons why Benitez left, was the lack of security over his job. Okay, because this takeover process has been going on while Benitez was manager and now Bruce. And that lack of clarity over who will be running the club from one week to the next, will this sale actually take place? Will I be kept in a job, or will the new owners sack me? That also has an effect. It has an effect on the playing squad. It has an effect on recruitment, because the transfer market has been a weakness of Newcastle for many seasons. They found some good steals in there. Don't get me wrong, when Pardew was manager, there were some good steals that they found in the transfer market that they made money on. But the issues are they're still involved in a tax fraud investigation with French prosecutors over the Jemba Bar transfer. Issues over recruitment and the right recruitment, the right players, the right price, and selling players as well. Issues over managerial stability. Regardless if it's Bruce or Benitez or whoever comes in, Pochettino has been rumoured to be the next manager, right? Regardless who the next manager is going to be, or if it's going to remain Bruce, the lack of clarity over their tenure, their position, is affecting playing group. It is affecting how the manager can go into the transfer market going, right, okay, I want to build a squad for this season. And you look at the amount of managers Mike Ashley's had at Newcastle, it is concerning, their lack of European football. And the fact that Benitez and now Bruce are working with a very limited budget and are performing miracles in keeping this club away from the relegation battle and actually getting relegated and keeping the club in the league. Benitez couldn't save them the last relegation, but he was kept on board, brought them back, and worked miracles with a small budget. Bruce has done the same. What happens going forward? Who knows? What happens with Newcastle going forward if Kenyon comes with a renewed bid, or Staveley comes with the Reuben brothers with a new bid with the Saudi backing? We'll have to wait and see. I don't think Newcastle will be taken off the table. I think Mike Ashley's going to keep the club on the for sale table. What happens going forward? We could be another 3 years down the line. It could take that long. I hope it doesn't. What the next 12 months is going to show us in football, we don't know. A lot of things are unknown going forward into the future. Absolutely. We have no idea what the future is going to look like in football in a month's time, let alone a year's time. What we do know is there's plans to get fans back in stadiums by the 1st of October. We know there's going to be a restructured season when it comes to cup competitions next year. There'll be no FA Cup replays, no two-legged League Cup ties. So we know that cup competitions are going to be streamlined. We know that there'll be no winter break next year. So already next season's being fiddled with on the fixturing. It'll be interesting to see if there is another lockdown and how football deals with that. I think we could see bubbles brought in, like in Australia and New Zealand and Canada when it comes to sport. I think nothing is off the table. Nothing. But I would still expect this time next year to there still be a protracted takeover at Newcastle. The fact it took 3 years for Amanda Staveley to get from her first initial bid to this point, near enough. I mean, we're a couple months off, but basically 2.5 years, although she would declared interest before she publicly put her bid public, when it was an unofficial bid. The club's been up for sale for 4 years. We know there's been at least 3 takeover bids, including the one that has just collapsed, that actually got to proper discussions in the boardroom. So we'll have to wait and see what happens. It's going to be a long way for Newcastle fans. Next season could be very unpredictable for them. And in fact, the whole Premier League season next season is going to be very, very unpredictable. And I honestly believe that as an assessment, as someone outside the box. I don't have a team in the fight because Blackburn's still in the championship. As a guy outside the box looking at a particular sport, I think football next season in all leagues is going to be very unpredictable. We know there's discussions going on in League One and League Two about restructuring the league, salary caps, spending caps, the lack of fans' attendance concerning clubs, financial woes of multiple clubs. So football's in crisis. Rugby union's having problems, and having to restructure the international calendar, trying to figure out a way to finish the Six Nations tournament, trying to figure out a way. They've just got their professional season restarted in the Gallagher Premiership. That took a long time, 5 months. Football has been restarted for quite some time now, a couple of months. That is surprising that rugby union has taken that long. We don't know if the South African teams are going to join the Pro League, all of them, or stay in Super Rugby going forward, or stay split. We don't know if Super Rugby as a format, as a competition, is going to stay as is, or is going to disintegrate into the various national competitions. Major League Rugby, we don't know if that's going to survive its infancy stage, if that's going to return for next season. The South American Rugby Union Championship, Major League Rugby in South America, how that's going to establish itself. Rugby League, I mean, there are concerns about the Super League and the TV deal and the Challenge Cup and being able to complete those competitions. There's concerns about the Toronto Wolfpack. Will they return next season? So sport as a whole, I mean, British touring cars, I'm a massive fan of British touring cars. Multiple drivers have failed to gain enough funding, and their teams have failed to get enough funding to have a full grid. There's a reduced grid this year. So some real key drivers, Jason Plato and Andrew Jordan, the British touring cars, aren't on the grid this year. Plato's near retirement anyway, but Andrew Jordan, big name, former champion, both former champions, haven't gained enough corporate funding and sponsors for teams to get on the grid. Rob Austin was meant to come back with the Alfa Romeo this season, hasn't. So these are race winners, these are champions. They haven't returned to their sport for this season, and their future is uncertain. Listening to interviews and reports given. So sport going forward is in a transition phase. And the big things to look forward to or look at is the Olympics and the Euros next year, and to see if they are actually going to take place as planned a year later. That's a big thing. We know the Tour de France is going to take place at the end of this month. It was meant to finish at the end of last month. So the Tour de France is 2 months behind schedule for finishing date. That's going to be interesting with what's happening in France right now with cases going up. And of course, fans love standing by the side of the road. The Tour de France without fans is not the Tour de France. So that's going to be interesting to see how the cycling deals with it. They've already got some events going on, like the Criterium de Dauphiné, which is a precursor to the Tour de France. There's been a few other road races take place. They're going to do the Vuelta and the Giro at the same time. So it's going to be interesting. But there we go. I'm going to leave that there. Thank you very much for watching for the last hour and 8 minutes. Lots of interesting questions. Not the most, I don't think this is my best live stream, but it's the first video I've done in about a month. And we'll see what happens going forward with sport, and we'll see what happens going forward with fans being allowed in attendance and a whole host of other things. And keep your eyes peeled. There will be some more videos following soon. I'll be doing some NRL videos in the next couple of days. We have to look at a lot of issues going on. And the Brisbane Broncos just keep making news for all the wrong reasons. And winning one game in, I think it's one game in away, 1-1 out of the last 13 games. Or 1 in 14 or something, or 1 in 12. It's not a good record there on. And the failed Newcastle United takeover, that's happened during the last couple of weeks. Lots happened. And there's going to be more happening going forward as well. Thank you very much for watching. I'll have some more videos for you very, very soon.